It's new bike day again today, and this one's a big one. I'm on Vancouver Island for the launch of the new Specialized Stumpjumper Evo. But is it even Evo? Let's find out. So Steve, I thought I was coming to see the new Stumpy Evo. This bike isn't an Evo, is it?
This bike is called the Stumpjumper 15.
Why is it called the Stumpjumper 15? Because this is 2024, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the 15th full suspension iteration of the Stumpjumper.
Okay, Steve, so if this isn't a Stumpjumper Evo and it's just a Stumpjumper, what's changed?
Really, we try to benchmark the capability of the current bike and of the current Evo and the agility of the current Stumpjumper and try to smash them into one bike.
Okay, so that's all well and good, right? But what specifically has changed about this bike?
With this bike, we're going to a 150 fork. You can run in 160, but predominantly the models are built around a 150 fork.
Yeah.
A little less travel in the rear, 145, but really with our shock tech, it rides like more than a 145 bike.
So does it still have all the adjustability of the Stumpjumper Evo?
Yes, this is a totally, if it's not broke, don't fix it type of situation here. And yeah, headset adjust with plus or minus 1 degree cups or nominal cup, and the horse pivot BB adjust that gives you about 7 or 8 millimeters of BB adjustment.
And what I want to know is, like, this bike looks a hell of a lot like a Levo SL, yeah? And the Levo SL has a little flip chip right in here. Does this bike have one?
It does not, yeah. We try to keep it simple on this. We got a lot of adjustments across the bikes.
So the adjustments are identical
Yeah.
to the old Stumpjumper Evo on the new Stumpjumper without the Evo.
Got it, yes,
Cool.
yes.
Actually, like, looking at the bike, you can see there's like an extra bit of kink here. Steve, can you tell me what that's doing to the bike?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the big goals here was increased C-post insertion across the size range. So yeah, that's just really allowing us to spec way bigger dropper posts for the gnarly riding people are doing on trail bikes these days. So one last mod we made on the frame was a new swap. So we call it Swap 4.0. Super easy to use, easy user interface. It's all about just being able to take this thing on and off quickly and just keeping the opening super usable so you can fit all your jackets, all your goodies, all your snacks in there.
So I measured the opening in the frame on all the different internal storage bikes, and like Specialized has the biggest one. So Steve, were you able to maintain that same kind of like capacity that you had with the old one with the streamlined door?
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing that changed is the volume of the tube is a little shorter, but the actual opening, what you can fit in there is the same.
Excellent. So if you're looking at this bike and you're thinking, man, that looks a lot like the old bike. Well, there is one big difference between this bike and the previous generation Stumpjumper. And Steve, like, tell us a bit about what you've done with the kinematic and the shock, and then we'll take it over to Chance, who works at Ride Dynamics, and he can go deep on it.
For sure, yeah. A big part of the changes for this bike is the leverage rate. And we learned a lot from our Levo SL Gen 2, and that flatter, lower leverage rate really just being a lot more consistent. And we brought that into this bike and the layout of this bike. But the big deal really is the shock tech, the Genie shock tech, and we'll pass it to Chance to explain his invention.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, man. Thanks for your time, Steve.
Thank you.
So Chance, I actually think you've got the most important job at Specialized. Like, I know other people disagree with this, right? But the product manager thinks he's the important guy because he gets to set the angles and choose the spec and make the price. The engineer thinks, oh, it's all about kinematics. It's about frame stiffness and the carbon layup. But I've tested enough bikes and done enough shock tuning sessions to know that basically it's the suspension that can totally change the feel of a bike.
It may not be the most popular opinion, but
well, at the company, it's Specialized.
Nah, they realize it. They know it's important. That's why we're putting so much effort into shocks. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's one of the most powerful tools that we have to change the ride feel of the bike.
Yeah.
And I mean, you think about leverage ratio. If you have nothing to leverage, it doesn't mean anything.
Totally.
And that's what we're leveraging is what we have here. So
what's cool and unique about this new Genie shock?
A lot of cool things. Technically, what it is dynamic dual stage air spring. But what's more important than that is
whoa, let's stop there. Like, he just glossed past like the dynamic dual stage air spring. It's like, what the hell does that mean?
There's a lot more to it, I guess. I can back up a little bit.
Let's back up.
How did we get there, I guess, is probably a good thing to look at. You can really set your air spring up two ways in a current setup. You can go with a progressive setup where you're really tuning for bottom out, or you can go for a linear setup, and that's where you're honing in a little bit more on the small bump compliance. And that's a compromise that we were setting out to eliminate.
Okay, and how did you do it?
That was our dual stage air spring.
Yeah.
So what it really does is we actually have one positive chamber to start. So you only pump up one valve. There's no complication there.
Yeah.
But dynamically, at about 70% of the stroke, those two chambers turn into, that one chamber turns into two chambers. So dramatically cutting out the extra volume that we've added. And that gives us all the support you need, basically all the progression, but in a specific spot of the travel.
Okay. So basically, you're cutting off your extra volume part of your can, so the outer can, basically. So you're just basically cutting that off at, what did you say, 70?
About 70% of the stroke.
And that just leaves you with like a really small positive spring?
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
So basically, we've added a ton of volume to the shock, and that's most of the ride feel that you have. But to get the support back, positionally, we're changing it back to a very small volume.
Okay.
So it gives you both.
It's actually like quite elegant. Because you didn't have to build a completely new shock for this, did you?
No, it's actually built across Fox's new float chassis. It's got some special parts on it for sure, but it's still a standard 210 by 55 shock. There's only about 3 unique parts to it.
Okay.
And serviceability and tunability is very easy. So yeah, we expect it to be an easy shock to live with.
Is this more difficult to set up than a normal shock?
No, it's actually very simple. The same as any normal air spring. We still have a positive and negative spring to transfer, but there's only one valve. You pump that up to the rider's pressure, set sag, and you're ready to go. One of the greatest things about it is really how simple and how scalable the system is. The 2 stages of spring, they work based on the pressure that you put in there. So heavier, lighter riders are going to get the same ratio from kind of the mainspring to the secondary ramp.
Yeah, and that's because basically the secondary, it's not a chamber. The secondary ramp is basically just a cutoff point within the main air spring.
Exactly. So its baseline is what pressure you started with.
Yeah, so it means it's totally scalable to every rider weight, no matter what pressure they're running.
Absolutely.
There's actually quite a lot of adjustment built into the shock too, right? So it's not just like, hey, everybody's got to ride one way.
Yeah, totally. And we have it comes out of the box in our basically favorite setting, but beyond there, we built in a lot of adjustability. We actually have 2 chambers now to tune volume on, and you can actually tailor specific parts of the stroke based on your riding style or the areas that you're riding.
We need to back up a little bit there because like Chance just drops these things and like everybody knows what he's talking about. So when you say you've got 2 chambers to adjust, you've got the
outer sleeve.
The outer sleeve, which is kind of like what people would normally know for like a X2 or something like that. They pull the sleeve off and put some bands in. But you've also got the main air chamber, which is just like a normal float shock, right? They've got where the spacers go in the head of the shock.
Yep, exactly.
So when you say you can tune both parts, you're basically saying, are you saying you can tune the bottom out and the mid-stroke support independently?
Yep, exactly. So in this shock, the outer sleeve is going to tune primarily the mid-stroke, basically from sag point to that 70% zone. And you can tailor that up and down independently without really affecting the end stroke. And vice versa, you can also just tune the very end stroke with the eyelet spacer. So if you're just looking for bottoming support, but you don't want to mess up your middle part of the stroke, you can do that as well.
Excellent. I mean, that's pretty unique for an air shock, right?
Totally.
No one else has that.
I think it unlocks a whole new level of tuning. I think volume has been always something people really tune just for this one bottom out event. In this case, we really want to unlock, especially with the outer sleeve spacers, the ability to tune for ride feel and not for the bottom out support. So you can run this shock in the outer sleeve completely empty, and you'll still have all the bottoming support. You can go hit big trails, things like that.
Because it's not determined by the outer sleeve, it's determined by the volume spacers that are in the you call this the eyelet of the shock or the head of the shock?
I call it the eyelet, the heads, both are correct, yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's really neat, right?
Yeah.
So the trails we've been riding for the past 2 days on Vancouver Island, there's a big mix of trails here, but the trails we've been focusing on are kind of like fast and flowing, there's some jumps and hits and stuff, so like when I first rode the bike, I was like, I wanted a little bit more support from it. And you were like, you said something really interesting. You said, oh, the trails we're riding here, I can see why you want to go in that direction. But you made a really interesting point that if we were riding chunky, gnarly, rocky trails where the trail kind of chips away at your trail speed, you were like, oh, it'll feel so much better if you went for like the more linear feel in the air spring.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, so for smoother, flowier trails, you can tune the outer sleeve. You can put more and more spacers in there. And you'll get a little bit more of a snappy feel. If you kind of think of it more like current Stumpy, right? So it'll actually give you a more of a short travel feel. But then on the other end of the spectrum, like you said, if you're riding chunkier trails, you can take that out, And it doesn't mean you're going to ride less aggressive. It's almost like you're setting up for the more aggressive mode.
Yeah.
And it just gobbles bumps really well, and you still have all the support out of the eyelet.
Yeah, so one of the things I was talking to Chance about was, like, I ride a particular trail at Bike Park Wells I do a lot of testing on, and there's a drop on it. And basically, like, if you just looked at where your O-ring was on your shock body at the bottom of the trail, you'd be like, yeah, I was using full travel. But what I do is I go off the drop, I stop, I reset the O-ring, and then I go into one of the gnarliest, fast sections of track, and it's like pretty rough. And invariably, I always come out of that bit of trail, and I've never used more than 75% of the travel.
Totally, and that's actually the part of the travel that we kind of dub the bump zone.
Yeah.
That's the area that you really are hitting bumps. The big drops and things like that, those are actually kind of an anomaly events that you hit only a few times in your ride, maybe not even in one ride. It might be just some certain trails that you ride. And
I think that section of trail where I'm kind of like, it's not super steep, I'm carrying a load of speed, and it's rough like crazy, that's where I'd expect that shock to perform the best in the linear setting.
Absolutely, yeah. It's almost like we call it party mode or DH mode.
Yeah. And the cool thing is then, if you go and ride somewhere like here, where we've been riding like fast, flowy, like some of those berms are just like built up like wall of death kind of turns. Like you can just put four volume spacers in, fill it up, and get all that kind of like ramp up back. And what I really like about that is you can tune your suspension behavior kind of almost independently of the kinematics.
Absolutely, yeah. It really unlocks a whole new level of tuning.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, I've been really impressed in the past couple of days, just with like also on how easy it was to like swap in, swap out volume spacers. I think this tech will really encourage people to play more with their suspension, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. We also built the adjustability in to be noticeable. Yeah. You're actually going to feel these changes.
So the range?
Yeah, it's not like a couple clicks here and there on your damper sometimes where you're just wondering if it did anything. Okay. These are real changes that you can feel on the trail and make a difference.
So Chance, one of the big things for me when I first rode this shock was, I was like, this would be even more effective in a fork. When's the fork coming?
That's a great question. It's definitely something we're always playing with. Anytime we land on something good, we're gonna kind of see where else it can go. So
how cagey are you being? We'll see it next year?
I doubt it next year.
Cool.
I've got one to ride, I'll tell you that much.
No way.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thanks a lot for your time. It's been amazing, just like being able to go so deep on an interesting product, but I also think you got your work cut out for you because you're going in the opposite direction to everybody else.
We're swimming upstream a little bit, but totally. I think it's gonna be worth it.
Cool. That was amazing getting to talk to Chance and Steve about all of the developments behind the new Stumpjumper 15. But what you really want to know is how does it ride? So let's get straight into it. So even though this bike's not an Evo, it feels just like the old Stumpy Evo because the geometry is nearly identical. One big difference though is the seat angle is slightly steeper, which makes the cockpit feel a little bit shorter, but also puts you in a better position for seated climbing. So I'm just cruising up a climb here, and I want to try and show you like the shock movement. I mean, like probably the second or third gear from the top of the cassette. If you try and look at the shock, there's really not much bobbing at all. And you got to remember, that's me riding one-handed, holding the camera out, and with my left knee poking out so you can see the shock. So the big difference on this bike's got to be the Genie shock. And for me, that just means you use more of the travel, more of the time. So in some respects, that's why it feels like a longer travel bike, even though it's actually 145 mil in the rear, which is 5 mil less than the old Stumpy Evo. And it's because of the reduced anti-squat and the Genie shock, this bike's more sensitive and has better grip uphill and downhill than the old Stumpy Evo. It's an absolute ripper. Basically, the new suspension's way more effective at absorbing bumps, so it's kind of like you've got a coil shock, but on a sub 14 kilo bike, which is pretty impressive, right? And like I mentioned before, you're not really sacrificing anything for sprinting or climbing, so like it really is a win-win situation with the suspension setup. So I'm just going to check that the bar and stem are tight, because there's a little bit of creaking coming out of the front end. You can probably hear it when I'm like, oh, yeah, that could be it. Always check a test bike after it's been used by someone else. Oh, those aren't very tight either. Hopefully that will eliminate the creaking that you're hearing on the video. So with one rev band in the outer sleeve of the shock, you've got plenty of support for like little tight turns like that. But then if you do push through with your feet, like in a G-out, you sort of can rip through the travel a bit too fast. It feels pretty different to a conventional bike, but I have to say, I really like the way it's using its travel. Also, if you want it to feel more like a regular bike, all you got to do is let the air of the shock slide the air can off, fill the outer sleeve of the air can with like the red bands, and it'll just feel rampy as normal. So you've got both choices, and that's the real beauty of the Genie setup, is that it gives riders a way wider range of options, just like the same with the adjustable geometry on the Stumpy Evo gave riders like a big range of geometry adjust. I like that those things are built into the bike, and then you can just basically have it however you want it. I think it's great. So there are a few things I'd like to touch on the spec on this bike. This model is the Stumpjumper 15 Pro Carbon, and it costs 7,500 pounds, which is pretty spendy, albeit for a very good high-end analog bike. For that money, you get a SRAM XO T-type drivetrain. You also get Maven brakes. The Maven brakes are super powerful, but they've also got quite a lot of resistance in the spring when the initial sort of spring force on the lever. So they can feel a little bit, how do you say, when you first get on them, they feel a bit grabby, but you kind of get used to it after a couple of runs, and there's definitely no doubting the stopping power. I just think that kind of initial spring force makes it harder to modulate them. I also really like the separate controller for the separate mount for the SRAM axis controller, because it allows you to mount your shifter pod independently of your brake lever, which means you can run your brake levers further inboard and have your shifter exactly where you want it. This model comes with a bike yoke dropper, which is like one of the best in the business. It's actually got a 185mm drop seat post in here, but you can see I've probably got like 30, maybe 35, 40mm sticking out of the frame still, so I could easily go to a 200mm dropper post on this size S4. Okay, so the bike I'm riding is S4, so it comes stock full 29, S1, S2 or MX, and you can convert this bike to an MX format too, so you can put a 27.5 wheel on the rear. All you got to do is change the shock yoke right here. This one's the 29er one because it's got a 29-inch wheel. Then what you'd have is a longer shock yoke to correct the geometry for the smaller rear wheel. Pretty simple, right? So the Pro model also gets the new Traverse SL2 rims, which are this kind of lower profile carbon rim. And it's got this kind of flat top design on the bead, which Specialized say helps reduce punctures. And what's really interesting is I've actually dinged the rear rim on this bike quite a lot. Whoa! More frequently than normal. And I was kind of wondering if it was the way the suspension behavior was, so that you kind of got that linear feel and the wheel's got momentum, and then all of a sudden there's a sudden ramp up at the end and then the tire gets overloaded and you ding the wheel. Or it could just be like the Eliminator rear tire, the grid trail casing isn't just as tough as I'm used to, and maybe I need to run a little bit more pressure. I'd also say that tire, when I rode it in Canada, the rear tire would tend to, like on kind of bermy G-out corners, it would really feel like it was going to step out suddenly and made me feel a little bit nervous. So I'd be swapping out the rear tire anyway, so it's probably not a problem. Yeah, what Specialized has done with the Genie shock technology is really innovative, and the sooner they can cram it into a fork, the better, because I can never get full travel out of an air-sprung fork. Specialized also needs to get its Genie shock technology onto cheaper platforms, because even the entry-level carbon Stumpjumper is like $6,000. So the sooner it can bring out an alloy Stumpjumper with the Genie shock, the better it's going to be for everybody. Also, given how few extra parts there were inside the shock, I wouldn't be surprised to see Genie shock technology on Fox DHX2, on RockShox Vivid Air. In fact, I could see Specialized putting Genie shock technology on any bike where suspension is priority. So basically everything other than a cross-country bike. So that wraps up my first ride on the Specialized Stumpjumper. Almost said Evo. It's not an Evo, it's just a regular Stumpjumper now. Do let me know in the comments if you like all this kind of suspension tuning stuff, or if you just pump up your tires and go ride. Thanks for watching, and if you want a more detailed review, head over to mbr.co.uk for my first full ride review. Cheers, bye.